like we look at that and then we look at how that's affected women. And the women that are fighting against it are looking to control and dominate men in the very same way that they've said that they've been controlled and dominated by men. So they've become the very thing that they fight against and that they hate. And then they become insulting, belittling, devaluing all of the things, which is not a transcendence of the very issue in the first place. Well, all it is just propagating it to the other side of the coin. It's the same thing as the red pill movement's now the answer to feminism. So first it was patriarchal dominance, which most of the people that cry patriarchal dominance are talking about shit that was happening hundreds of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like, okay, so feminism was the answer, and now red pill and MGTOW are the answer to that. And then the other antithesis to that is to go hardcore trad Christian. So there's no, I'm like you, I'm sort of like, I'm just my own being.
Hello and welcome back to A Woman Refined. I am your host, Lauren Renee, as always, and this is episode 2. I have with me today, my special guest is my good friend Jaguar Hart. You may know him as Pure Jaguar on Instagram, and also I now believe X and TikTok, as he informs us at the end of the call, which hopefully you get to. This is a doozy. Boy, do I have a podcast for you today. It is almost 2 hours long. So strap in, get yourself somewhere comfy, get yourself a beverage, and be prepared. Be prepared because we go where others are afraid to go. We speak on, I think, every taboo. Yeah, I think it is possible that we speak on every taboo you could possibly speak on in this episode. We approached this call with no agenda. We thought we'd say hi and see where we go, but we knew that we would go deep and that we would discuss the nuance and intricacies that a short form probably wouldn't allow for, or a curated topic wouldn't allow for. So we've just opened it up and you're in for a ride. So hopefully you enjoy all the regular things that every podcast tells you to do: click like, follow, share, subscribe, all that kind of fun stuff. And if you like it, please tell your friends. All right. I hope you enjoy. Just a quick little note for this episode. We had the internet drop out at some point at the beginning within the first few minutes. So you will feel a little bit of a time lapse where we had to recalibrate our conversation, but it is still there in full. So hopefully it's not too disruptive for you and you continue to listen and enjoy. All right. Hi, welcome.
So what did we call this? Is it Listen Up Peasants, or what is it?
Oh, look, I'd love it to be Listen Up Peasants. I think it's like the two aspects of my personality is the listen up peasants aspect. But I think I'm just going to stay with A Woman Refined and we'll just kind of go from there. We'll talk about human refinement, basically. Obviously, I'll have a more feminine angle, but the refinement of humanity, I think, is needed right now. I think we need to look at what the hell we're doing because it's not going well for a whole bunch of people.
So what would be the first area that you look at?
If I was to refine humanity, connection to God.
Yeah.
I think people are deeply disconnected from nature, from each other, and from whatever divine celestial being or even human or nature-based being that they believe in. They're disconnected from something deeper. They're disconnected from each other, and they're disconnected from the human plane that we are living on, this 3D experience.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's even like an over connection to self and feelings. Like I think there's too much focus on that at the moment. Whereas it's like, when I think it's when you damage the prefrontal cortex, there's a me, there's a you, but there's no we. And so people nowadays don't seem to have this ability to say, hey, there's me here and I can't consider someone else. It's really kind of forms a fundamental aspect of being a psychopath, is there's no ability to say, okay, there's a you and a me. So I would say like the refinement needs to be, from my side, I agree with the connection to God, but because there's a bit of intangibility with that, because it's like there's so many different religions, like how do we define that? But I agree with you with nature, all of that. To be more tangible about it, I'd say there needs to be a refinement around what's real and wasn't, and the not allowing everyone to have every tiny little experience validated by every single person that ever existed through the nature of being offended.
Yeah.
That's
Absolutely.
how I do it.
Yeah, I think when we stopped living in tribes and in communities that relied upon each other, and that where we had the family unit as a pillar of the community, which had so many different knock-on effects, even to the point of where mothers were able to be with their children all the time. And if they weren't, they were with other family members or close community members. And when we went, this is like pre-feminism, so we're going way, way back. We go into pre-Victorian era, and we're talking about where we removed children and they were with wet nurses. They removed them from the parents. They didn't sleep with the children anymore. They were raised outside of the home. They were sent to boarding schools, all this kind of stuff. Sleep training that came in the 20th century, all this kind of stuff. It, like you said, it damages the brain. It literally damages the brain. And the parts of the brain that it damages is the results of what we're seeing right now, that inability to work as a community, which is what we need.
Yeah, I got asked in a podcast because I had this guy comment. He was a pastor, actually. I can't remember the post I did, but it was something around the boomer generation being fucking useless and emotionally retarded, essentially. That word's going to offend people, but fuck, whatever. It's a colloquialism. It's not like an actual fact that I'm saying. So,
but
this
in some
inability
ways, they
to be
are
emotionally
literally retarded. Their growth was
correct.
slowed.
Yeah, it was completely stopped and stunted.
Yes.
And this guy said this is one of the most, and I said, like they were responsible and they were irresponsible, and they really have created a fucked up generation. And this pastor, he was in his, I think, 50s or something like that, said this is such an immature and cowardly response. They were like that because the previous generation couldn't handle it, and then that generation couldn't handle it either, so they passed it on. And I was like, no, I don't accept that, because what you're saying is the previous generation to us was too irresponsible because the previous generation was too traumatized. So what did they do? They gave it to children. That's cowardly to me. Instead of going, I'm going to face my shit. I'm going to deal with it. I'm going to look after it. I'm just going to pass it on to my kids to deal with it, and then blame the kids for the behavioral disruption that they create based on my own inability to look at my own stuff and deal with it because the previous generation was too traumatized. And because a person asked me, like, why do you think there's so much trauma that's been handed down? I said, well, how do you traumatize a generation? You start a war. It's the easiest way to traumatize an entire generation. Now, I don't see a World War III style scenario playing out, because too many people like, I'm not fucking going to fight a war for rich bureaucrats to get rich off us dying. But it's been a spiritual war, a war on consciousness that's come through. And the gender argument, the gender notion has been the weapon of that after COVID to divide even further. Because if you look at all types of wars, war on drugs, war on terror, war on climate, war on gender, it's all this kind of like intangible, you can't really pin it down. There's a lot of gray areas. There's a lot of vagaries that you can operate in. It's like people go, how do you define gender? It's like, well, define what it isn't before you can define what it is, and they choose sort of invisible things that you can't really determine, but you can kind of say they're there. Like climate, you can say, okay, well, yeah, it's kind of heating up. They're also fucking spraying the skies every third day. So it's like, that's convenient. Terrorism is like there's an ominous threat that you can't really define, but then it's attributed to a whole race, but then the whole race isn't like that. And it's like, how do you define who's who? And there's a lot of confusion in cloak and dagger style. COVID, it's like, well, you could be asymptomatic, you could be symptomatic, you might have it, you might not be able to transmit it. If you get your vaccine, then you're protected, but you're not fully protected. So then the unvaccinated to blame. It's all that Hegelian dialect, which is problem, reaction, solution against an invisible enemy. And so now it's like, if your identity and distinct biological differences are called into question, can really push someone to the edge of insanity because yeah, it's like an enemy that you can't really see, but you think is always there. You know,
Yeah.
and it's like the boogeyman that they used to scare kids, which I actually think that story is designed to make the ability to create an invisible enemy later more real for people, because it's like ghosts and spirits and the devil and all this other stuff, which could be seen as this thing you never see, but you're always afraid of.
Mm.
And so COVID, climate, the gender war, you know, terrorism, all these, the war on drugs, wars that can never be won, but nevertheless they still go in these needless wars that cost a lot of money because there's always something to fight against. Like COVID was mad. Like, you know, it's you might have it, but you might not have it, and you might kill someone even if you don't have it. And it's like then the big thing was the unvaccinated, and then it's like, okay, so if the vaccine protects you, then why do you care about the unvaccinated? You know, it's like there was just like really, really high level psychopathic levels of manipulation that were
Yeah.
deliberately implemented on the public to create fear and confusion. And that's like the definition of insanity, you know, people seeing the reality of what it is. You know, I remember my mum, because she's a full on panic merchant. She said to me, this was like 8 years ago, and she said, this is when I was traveling a lot. And she goes, do you get travel insurance? I said, no. And she goes, well, what happens if you lose your stuff? I said, I'll buy more. And she goes, and I was wearing like an expensive gold Rolex at the time. And she said, well, what about that thing on your wrist? I said, what about it? She goes, what if someone tries to rob you? I'm like, well, they're going to have to break my arm to get it off me. And she goes, well, what if they've got a gun? I'm like, then they can have the fucking watch. You know, so it's like this fear implementation that's so normalized, but she'd been like, programmed by the news to think everywhere's dangerous. And I was in Germany when there was apparently this mass Muslim migration. I was there, and it was like it's just a normal weekend. There wasn't, it wasn't bad. There was nothing going on. So it's sensationalized in order to produce this idea that there's an enemy out there waiting behind every corner. You know, I've traveled the world. I've been to, I don't know, 60, 70 countries, something like that. I've never seen an incident of violence anywhere. In fact, quite the opposite. I've been helped in many places. And I would actually say more people are friendlier around the world than they are in Australia, much friendlier. People in Australia are actually fucking pretty rude and pretty selfish and pretty fearful. And everywhere I've been to Africa, most continents, and I've never had seen an incident of trouble.
Yeah, I'm similar actually. Um, I remember being helped in the middle of Rome with luggage and just like not even a question. They didn't even come and ask me. They just started carrying my stuff up for me and then just kept walking. They're like, that's just what you do. You know, it
Yeah.
was never an issue. Yeah, it's funny, you know, because I think when we look back, look, there's a lot of conspiracies, but when you look back at the takeover of all the institutions, whether it's the medical institution with the media and the governmental institutions, all these things were rolled out at a similar time, and all of them had that same concept: the psychological warfare, the underlying aspect of fear, because of what fear does to the brain and how it makes you react, the chemical changes and the hormonal changes that happen inside of your body when you are living in a state of fear and when you're constantly being bombarded in fear. And if this is pervasive across your entire community, because what actually community does, you have a co-regulation, you have reality of what is in front of you. So like what you're saying, you get told these things, but then your actual reality is, I see that this is not my current truth. What I'm experiencing in this world is not that. I'm experiencing help, kindness, I'm experiencing connection. This is not the fear that I have been propagandized by. So that creates a
Yeah.
disconnect. But there is this level that is so pervasive now in so many generations that there's a cognitive dissonance. So even when you're seeing that, you're undoing that inside of your own brain, and you can't co-regulate. So then your cortisol's through the roof, and then that puts you in the medical system, which gaslights you to all hell, you know. And then they've been in the educational system, you've been in the educational system, your whole life you've been told to be subservient and
listening to authority and all that kind of stuff. And then you don't have a community that's going to help you out if you get sick, if you're like unable to provide for yourself, or you have a sick child or a sick mother that you need to take care of. You're on your own. And it's a sickness of the human, which is why, coming back to that original question, where do we need the refinement of humanity? And if we get back to connection will discombobulate the programming.
Yeah.
There's
definitely.
no way that you're sitting in nature and being terrified of, whatever he, her, she, they, whatever is happening, screaming down the road at Target. Like, nobody cares. You're completely immersed in reality.
Yeah. And I think that's a really interesting point, because I'll talk about cognitive dissonance. Most people don't understand what cognitive dissonance is. And it happens as a result of what's called introjective splitting internally. When we're in an abusive environment, what happens is there's a fracturing between the true self or authentic self, and the false self emerges. And the cognitive dissonance is a part where the bad about the environment or the relationship to the person is pushed away, and the good is only reinforced. One of the biggest red flags you'll ever see with someone that is actually narcissistic or psychopathic, which is a lot of, like, you look at the vaccinated people, oh, it's just time to forgive and forget. Forgive and forget is the hallmark of an abuser. So when someone starts to say that, you are with someone that's abused you and wants to sweep it under the rug and not deal with it. So cognitive dissonance is like an experience of anxiety, pain, and dread that emerges in a state of stress where your authentic self is in conflict with the false self. I did a podcast with a guy. He wouldn't release the podcast because I was saying that the gender argument is gender dysphoria was a mental illness and it shouldn't be supported in schools the way that it is. And he wouldn't release the podcast because of that. And I said, there were two things that I said in it that I believe he didn't like. He didn't really tell me which exact pieces were, but I noticed his energy change when we were discussing it. And I said, according to childwelfare.org, the biggest abusers of children are their mothers. That's a statistical fact from a US government website. And he was raised by a single mum. And I said the other thing was that gender dysphoria should not be supported in schools where children are easily influenced. It's cruel. That's a form of psychological abuse where they cross the boundary of the child. Yeah. They blur the meridian between what's real, what's the adults, and what's the child's. So the child can't not disassociate, but he can't have a disassociation from, or she or he can't, from what they're being told to what they're actually experiencing internally. This forms the nature of what they use in cults to trauma bond children through splitting them internally to make sure they cannot differentiate between what the adults is and what theirs is. That is high-level psychological abuse. And if you're doing that to a child by supporting and saying, it's not to deny a child's experience, but I think, gender dysphoria was like less than 1% not long ago. Now I heard a stat the other day, which is 20% of kids in England have some sort of gender dysphoria. Now, if you look at that in the last couple of years, the jab, I think, has a part to do with that. I've got a doctor that works, he's on a world council for this stuff that I see every couple of months. I get my blood checked just to make sure it's all clear and it's all good. And he believes that part of the injuries that are incurred are what's in the actual jab goes to the prefrontal cortex and reduces a person's ability to be able to think logically and reasonably, which is why, they've got kitty litter in kids' classrooms for kids that think they're cats. And this is what I said in that other podcast. I said, that's fucking madness. I'm not going to try to fight against that. I just removed my kid from that system. That's not a healthy ecosystem for a child to develop healthy ego boundaries and have a healthy sense of self where his individual expression from a place of authenticity is expressed, because a kid's not a cat. A kid's not a Ninja Turtle or a packet of peanuts. There needs to be reality, which is brought back into a grounded perspective where the child's allowed to develop a healthy sense of self, not be made to think whatever's normal in the status quo to damage a child's sense of self through the fracturing that I was discussing before, which produces cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. I think there's 3 points in there that I wanted to expand on. I think the first one is that You're absolutely right. Gender dysphoria is a mental illness. And there was a point where we stopped treating it like a mental illness, which is not helping the people who have the mental illness. We're not assisting those people. We are not doing our duty of care. These people are unwell and need our help, because this is not normal. And you have people like, well, what is normal? We actually have a definition of normal based on your biological standing. And if you are born without a uterus or without testicles, they would say that is an abnormality, because that is not a normal presentation of a gender or a sex. So we understand that there is something going on that is not right. We're not addressing that. And there are a few people who I follow, particularly in Gays Against Groomers, which I think is a wonderful organization, that are transgender, that admit, I have gender dysphoria, I have a mental illness, and this is how I've come to deal with it, but you don't need to push this on children. And when you look at the prevalence of the transgender agenda, because that's the real issue. It's not that there's transgender issues occurring in the individual, it's the agenda around it. And it's very, very similar to when we were in high school and we had the social contagion of eating disorders. I'm sure you had it in your high school. I had it in my high school. Everybody knew someone who had anorexia or bulimia. And they did a study in Japan where was it Japan? I think it was Japan. And they hadn't heard of these eating disorders. And they had a really, really, really low amount of eating disorders in that country. They got exposed to the American media, and the uptake in eating disorders like shot through the roof within the space of a year. It's a social contagion, and that's very similar to what's happening now. But we have an added layer of an agenda that goes along with that. We have a medical system that it's not just these jabs, it's all the other jabs that we had as children. And because you got to remember, our parents had 7, we had 12, these kids are getting 74, and those are made using different DNA fragments, which you're then injecting into a small child's body. We don't know if that's affecting things, but there's a chance that it could. There's things like the chemicals in our water, to quote the crazy man, the turning the frogs gay, the atrazine in the water. You know, there are chemical reactions that are happening in our bodies that are also not considered. And then on top of that, we have a generation, which is our generation, Generation X, and the millennial generation, that is raising these children who were deeply separated from their parents and felt invalidated by their parents, so have swung hard the other way to try and over-validate their children, but they have not realized that what they're doing is not parenting. We don't explain or have a basic level of understanding of what parenting is anymore. Back in our parents' generation, everybody knew what it meant to be a parent. Kids play make-believe, you let them play make-believe. They dressed up, you dress up. You want to call yourself a Ninja Turtle, call yourself a Ninja Turtle. But when it comes to dinner time, you sit down at the table, you eat, that's fine, we're not playing that anymore. There was an understanding of how children's brains worked and how we allowed the play, and then we brought them back into reality because we were the parents and we were the leaders of the household. We don't have that anymore. And that statistic about the mothers being the most damaging to single parent households, like to damaging to the children, mothers can be wonderful when mothers are allowed to be mothers or can be mothers based on the environment they're in. When mothers are trying to be mothers and fathers and career women and all that kind of stuff, women are not made to do those kind of things. We're actually made mainly just to nurture at a certain period of our lives. And when we are disconnected from that and we don't feel safe and we're not financially supported and all those kind of things, we become the worst kind of mothers. That's not the kind of mother that is conducive to a healthy child that anybody needs, or that produces a healthy next generation. Also, women are not so great on boundaries. And you don't have a father figure saying in there going, don't speak to your mother like that, or don't speak to my wife like that. That's not how we do this in this household. I don't care what your opinions are. You know, the man comes in and he's less feeling, he's less actually chemically, hormonally bonded to the child. So he's able to remove himself from the situation. Whereas the mother is deeply affected by her child's pain, deeply affected by her child's cries. And she should be. That is natural and normal. But then we're putting them in situations where they can't use those hormones correctly. So all of this creates a shitstorm that then the media then capitalizes on. It's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much in that, which were all good points. So the first thing was like all the chemicals and stuff they're doing. I just look at that and I go, if we weren't powerful, they wouldn't need to do that.
Yes.
They wouldn't have to try to kill us at every turn. So there's something in that just by virtue of the fact they need to do that. The other thing with the mothers, I've sort of seen these things recently, which have been really important and interesting to look at. You know, I hear a lot of women saying, there's no good men, you know, I want to be a wife. I'm like, no, you don't want to be a wife. You just want to get married. You don't want to be a wife. There's a big difference between the two.
Yes.
That's why so many marriages are breaking down. And in the space of, you know, this hyper boss babe kind of culture, which, you know, one of the most common person that hits on me in my DMs is usually a goddess, right? The goddess culture type. And one of the things that I say is like, you call your, yeah, I'll get into that in a minute. Is I say, you don't want to be a queen, you want to be the king. And it's like, they look at that role as like, they come in and they're like, I'm a queen, I'm a goddess, whatever. And they act very masculine. So they try to dominate, talk over, do all of that kind of stuff. And I always say to the women like that come in, like, do you know how many have hit on me, asked me out, haven't written back or said no? You know what they do? They either insult me, unfollow me, and block me. These are women in positions of leadership that they come in, and you know what they come in and say universally? Your work is so amazing. I love your work. I've been following you for ages. And the minute they don't get what they want, bam, blocked, you're out. So they're not coming in loving my work. They're coming in under a false pretense most of the time. And then if I don't get back to them or whatever, they lose their shit. These are women that are apparently in positions of leadership, leading other people. And the minute I say no or I don't get back to them, there's an emotional reaction that they can't handle. And it's like these people want to be in a position of like control over someone else. And they all say, you know, I can't wait to meet a masculine man. I said, a masculine man's going to put you in your place. And you won't know what to do about it because you're not used to people putting you in your place. And I've said to a number of them, I'm like, when you get a masculine man, for you, it's going to be like a dog chasing a car. It looks attractive to chase, but when you catch it, you won't know what the fuck to do with it. Because this inability to be with someone that's grounded, calm, powerful, and present and say, I'm not okay with that. And I did this to a woman a few months ago. I said very calmly, said, what you're presenting is a double standard. She had a kid. This was a while ago now, actually. She had a kid. And I said, what are your non-negotiables in a relationship? She goes, I'd never date a guy with a kid. And I laughed and I said, yeah, what's the real one? And she's like, no, I never would. And I said, but you've got a kid. And she was like, yeah, but I'm not dating a guy with a kid because of the way that I was raised. I'm like, you call yourself a spiritual leader. This is self-titled spiritual leader. I said, leaders do what they ask the people that follow them to do. I said, I will never, ever do something that I won't, that if I ask someone to do something, I'll make sure I've done it first. Everything I teach, I've walked through myself. Like I was just on the phone with a woman before and she goes, do you teach women how to be women? Because I have a real problem with women teaching men how to be men. And I don't think they should do it. And I think that they can collaborate with another man to do it. But there's Alison Armstrong's very good. She's like the only caveat that I'll make around it, but she teaches women how to understand men, not men how to be men. But I've seen women out there that coach men on how to be men. And I'm like, no, if you're going to that woman, you want a mother. You don't want someone to actually, you know, you need a man to teach you how to be a man. And she said, do you teach women how to be women? I said, no, why would I do that? I'm not a woman. And so we see these, you know, double standards around things like women telling men how to be men through the perspective of what they need the man to be, which is typically more like a woman than it is to actually be a man. And so these washed out ideas around what it takes to be a man or how we need to get there are getting conflated with now this inability to even be able to define gender. And I think Jordan Peterson said it the best. He goes, my moral duty is not to support your delusions. And I'm fully about that. And I said that to this other guy that I did a podcast with. I said, it's delusional. It is. And he said, well, I want to come from a more approach of compassion, so I'm not going to release it. I said, you can call that compassion, but that's called censorship. you should release the podcast because it may help other people break out of what this is.
Yeah, and it's compassionate to acknowledge the seriousness of what's actually happening, the reality. The compassionate thing to do is to say, I'm so sorry that they have gotten in your brain and all of these things have affected you in this way. That must be really hard, but I'm not going to play along and pretend like you are a cad or that you are something that you are not. I had a transgender friend, sorry. I had a transgender friend a few years ago, and it was a man to a woman, and she was very upset that they didn't pass. And I said to them, I'm really glad you don't pass. I wouldn't want you to pass, because then you are not able to connect with the people who are on the same journey as you, who need advice of what you've been through, right? Because you're pretending to be something that you're not. But right now, it's very clear that you're a man who feels like they have a woman inside of them. That you feel like a woman in a man's body. That's very clear. And that's actually authentic. That's your thing that you're on right now. Now, who am I to say whether that's right or wrong or legitimate or not legitimate? But that is the reality. I've never pretended that you're something that you're not. And if you were to pass, it would be deceitful and not authentic to who you are, and denying all, this was an elderly gentleman as well. So he was in his 60s, denying your entire life as a man. And all of the things that you learned and went through and experienced, denying all of that to become this new person who has no history, who has no family, who has no personality, no identity other than a make-believe identity, is not honoring your journey, not honoring who you are. That's the truth of it. We have to honor who you actually are, and that you actually are a man who thinks that they're a woman. That's the truth of it.
Yeah. And I will treat someone with respect and dignity because they're a human being. So I kind of get put in this category of like, you hate them or whatever. And I'm like, no, I don't. If I speak to someone that's in that world, I'll treat them with dignity and kindness because they're a human being and they deserve that. Where I'm not okay with it is like where it extends down to children. That's what I'm not okay with. That, there's exposure that children see to, violence these days, to pornography. And this is just the same kind of thing. If it can influence and damage a child's brain, which it can, I'm not okay with that from a traditional perspective. But if I see, your friend that's 60 years old, I would sit down, and if he was at the dinner table with me, I'd treat him as a normal human being with kindness and respect. I can be a bit direct and outspoken sometimes, which gets conflated with aggression and, hyper masculinity or whatever you want to label it. But I see, the whole like the polarity thing of, my inner feminine, I really feel that that's been a lead up to this. And we've labeled that aspect of emotions as being feminine. I don't know why we've labeled your emotions as that's my inner feminine. It's just, that's a natural part of being human. And I think that's what's been used almost as a weapon to lead into this transgender thing. Like I saw this one coach in, I think he was in Thailand, and he was dancing around in a dress saying, you've got an inner goddess in you. I'm an alpha male. I'm just alpha enough to dance around in a dress. And I'm like, no, I don't see that. You might be okay. You might be comfortable in your expression, but anyone that needs to call themselves an alpha isn't an alpha. Like they're just not. And I think that's been conflated with that all these things or practices are like, I'm in my feminine. David Data was kind of the person that pushed that forward. And I've read a lot of his work, and John Wine, a lot of their stuff's great. I like a lot of their stuff. But this sort of idea that my core is feminine, if that was the case, the energetic expression, the blueprint, I'd be a woman. That's where I don't agree with it. It's this intangible spiritual bullshit that people come up with, in my opinion. And it's not to rip on anyone or hate on anyone. I've got friends that have worked with him that have done amazing stuff. I don't know him personally, but he talks about having a feminine core, that he's got a feminine core. I'm like, by virtue of physics and the expression of our nature, if you had a feminine core, you'd be a woman, in my opinion. I just look at biological imperative, biological blueprint. You might feel a certain way, but this is where I dismantle feelings a lot. Go back in your history and look at every single thing that you regret deeply. Every single one of those will be made from an overwhelming emotional feeling state. You use the application of logic to make a measured decision that's rational, assessing all potential outcomes. You'll go, that was a good learning opportunity. I made a mistake, but I learned from it. You might have that outcome when you realize that what you did was a mistake by operating in an overly emotional state. But everyone that makes decisions that they regret are done in an emotional state. So if you want to pay attention to your feelings, that's never really going to be a very good signpost for an outcome that's going to be for your best interest, except to realize that you shouldn't follow your feelings all the time. So this idea that we've got this, I don't know, this feminine core and stuff like that, it promotes this kind of stuff. And yeah, anyway, I'll leave that part there because I'll keep going otherwise.
You can keep going. I don't mind. That's my jam.
I just really want to just before you continue, I really want it to be really clear. This is just my opinion. I don't hate on anyone that's doing their work in the world, but there's a part of it that I don't agree with. And if it's like, if they have a right to be able to say something, I have a right to be able to disagree with it. That's the foundation for liberty, is most people don't want to hear the truth. And if it's disagreeing with public opinion, look, I'm okay with that. I get shredded by feminists, as you do as well. And whatever alphabet city thing that's going on, it's like, I'm okay to speak the truth. I'm a biological male. I'm a man. I'm masculine. It's not some social construct. Mother Nature has designed me for a specific purpose, and I'll fulfill that purpose based on being in harmony with the ecosystem that I live within.
Absolutely. Well, that's also my jam as well. I don't agree. I think a lot of it goes back. I mean, you can go back to Jungian principles of the anima and the animus that is within. Or even if we go back even further, the yin and the yang. And I think what happens is people simplify those terms and try to make them applicable to their paradigm. And I think when they do that, they disregard its true meaning. For example, like the yin and yang, an outward expression versus an inward expression. And yet we've genderized that.
Yeah.
So yes, you can have both yin and yang inside of you. My entire feminine spectrum can have bits that are outward and some bits that are inward. That doesn't mean that one of them is masculine and one of them is feminine. These are the intricacies and the nuances and the languaging that has been manipulated that gets us into trouble. And I totally agree. When we have, it gets a little leaky when we have this, amalgamation of embracing the inner feminine, the inner masculine. Or when women, from my perspective, are trying to not be so masculine, trying not to be something that you're already not is a hamster wheel that you will never get off. That is not healing. Yeah. That is not coming into your feminine. That is psychosis. And you cannot be masculine. You are expressing an aspect of the feminine from a wounded place or a traumatized place or a shadowy place, whatever you want to call it, from a place that is not healthy, that is not mature. And if you were able to go, that's still feminine, but it just isn't serving me, how am I going to bring myself back and unpack that crap and express that in a healthy manner? Then I think it would be a lot quicker. I could tell you that. It would be a lot quicker for a lot of people, not stuck on this hamster wheel of years of like spiritual self-development. And would be able to kind of come back to healthy expression, healthy communication, healthy relationships, healthy communicating. It's I feel it's the biggest trick that we have had in the last decade of self-development, has been not recognizing the polarity within the polarity and oversimplifying. Yeah. So we go to the black and the white, whether it's the jab or climate change or transgender, it's either you believe in it or you don't believe in it, rather than having nuanced conversations about what do you actually mean when you say that? Because you've said something and I think you know what you mean, but that doesn't make any sense. And what do you actually mean? And to assign feelings to the feminine, I agree. It is a human thing to be feeling. To make a decision from logic is not necessarily a feminine aspect. We work more gut-based, more intuition-based. We don't necessarily also work feeling-based. And I hear a lot of men give this rhetoric around, this is why women shouldn't be in politics. This is why women shouldn't vote. I've been told that I shouldn't vote because I'm a woman and I'm too emotional. And I think you're emotional. You're being emotional right now. You're outraged that I have logic that I am bringing to this conversation, and you cannot actually handle it as a man. Look at you having a meltdown right now over this situation.
Yeah.
But I'm speaking very calmly about that, and I'm saying I don't agree. So there's this idea of what something is that isn't accurate. And I think that's the trickery that has led us to this stage of psychosis where people don't know who they are, what they mean, what words mean, where they fit in community. They have no sense of self, no sense of community, no sense of identity, no sense of feeling, belonging, family, and they have no structure in which to express themselves and live out their lives. Because you need structure. You need the structure, a house to make a home. That's how this world works. This world is a world of balance and polarity, yes, but there is so much nuance within that.
Yeah, I was listening to a book by David Data, and I turned it off after like half an hour because he was like, I'm in New York and I'm eating ice cream and New York is feminine, the ice cream, whatever. And I was like, this is like over pathologizing everything, right? It's like the quote, the thing named is not the named thing.
Yes.
Or the map, the territory, but the territory is not the map, right? And it's like, but in this world, the territory is the map and the map is the territory. So there's no separation between what's real and what is fictitious. And this is fantasy that people grow up in. And fantasy is typically when we are trauma bonded to someone that is that actually is really narcissistic through narcissistic personality disorder, which is a rare psychiatric condition. Everyone's ex is a narcissist now. Everyone's. I'm like, yes, there's trait narcissism, but there's also narcissistic personality disorder. And then there's, comorbidities with borderline personality disorder, bipolar, psychopathy, Machiavellianism, all of that stuff, sociopathy. These are like very rare psychiatric conditions, but now everyone's got them. And so everyone's over pathologizing themselves. There's even a term called pathological love, where someone starts to become pathological in a relationship around their relationship with love. And so this is what we're in with the government. It's this kind of master-slave construct, cult-style system that's structured. So when no one really has a strong, solid sense of self, they can't delineate between what's mine and what's someone else's. And so they just pick up the next big thing and they go, cool, eating ice cream's feminine. Thanks, David Data. And I'm in New York. It's like, no, it's a bunch of people that live in a geographical location that do shit. The city's not feminine, or like eating ice cream is not, whatever. I can't remember what he said. It was something stupid like that. But it's this over labeling of everything. Like, and we see that in pop psychology now. Oh, it's just my trauma. I'm trauma informed. Like trauma informed was a label that got spread out there, that even like something financial is like I'm trauma informed about financial difficulty. I'm like, man, or just go get a job. Go and work if you can, or figure something out. But it's this hyper encouragement of hyper victimization. Like so much so, I mean, I live in Byron, which is like Bundjalung County, and it's like the only people that are ever talking about it are white women, right? Like not doing anything to actually support the community. And if they are, they're just waving the flag of virtue signaling, which they've done nothing to earn. They don't help the community. I was speaking to a woman recently, and she was saying, she goes, I want a man that comes home and talks about politics and war, and I want to talk about economics and blah, blah, blah. And I said, that's the last thing in the world that I want to talk about, because I said on one of my Q&As that I wouldn't talk about everything that's going on in the world. If you want that, go to the mainstream media. She's questioned me about it. And I said, honestly, I'm a man of action. And I said, respectfully, what the fuck are you doing about it? Because all you care about is making sure people think that you care. That's all. Because if you really cared, you'd be over in Palestine helping them or doing food runs or whatever it is. But you don't really fucking care. You just want people to think that you care. That's virtue signaling, and that's compassionate narcissism that plays out. And all these people that take on a cause, I don't talk about the Israel and Palestine thing because I haven't fucking earned it. I've done nothing to earn outrage in that. Yes, children being killed, that should just be a general consensus. You should be outraged by that. But no one in my family is Jewish. No one in my family is Palestinian. I don't know enough about the history. And for me to go and virtue signal and take that on as though I've earned that, I've done nothing to earn it. Zero. I've had a narcissistically abusive mother. I've fucking earned the right to talk about that, help people through that. What's going on in the world. That is to me, I find that disrespectful to people that are affected by it. And I wouldn't take that on as my own trauma to jump into some collectivist ideal that now I'm some good person to sound, to my friends and my neighbors and my colleagues that I'm virtuous because I've done nothing to earn it. I'm a man of action. If I want to help something, I'll go and fix it. My war is on masculinity. That's the fight that I'm in. Any other thing around that, I haven't earned that right. I haven't. And I think people take these causes on, these injustices, to be like, I've got something to fight for, while they, to quote Jordan Peterson, can't even make their own fucking bed.
Yeah, for sure. Collectivism, whether it's Ukraine or Israel, Palestine, and Indigenous rights, whatever. It's again, this searching for community, searching for tribe, because when you are in fear, the thing that, again, co-regulation, you want to feel safe within a group. So you're going to try and find something, the easiest thing that is going to make you feel like you belong and make you feel like you are a valuable part of that community. So if I can get online and say this, and then other people are going to go, yeah, good for you saying that, then I feel like, okay, I've done something worthwhile. I've done something valuable. And I have all these feelings, which, feelings, word, I don't know where to put them. I don't know how to process them. They live online, because that is not, you're not directly being affected by Israel and Palestine or Ukraine and Russia in your day-to-day life, and you're dropping the kids at school and getting your triple mocha latte, whatever the fuck, at your local cafe. That's not your reality. So your feelings are living online. And so you're getting this almost like a gambling addict or a porn addict, where you're getting that dopamine hit from the likes and from feeling worthwhile and feeling worthy, because you lack purpose in your life and you lack vision and you lack self-worth and value. Whereas someone who understands media manipulation as well. So my background working in PR for Warner Brothers, actually, for a massive media organization, I got a really good look into how that propaganda machine runs. And I was an active part of that. And I understand how to manipulate people into doing something that they think was their own idea. That was actually my job. It was, how do I get you to watch and buy this film, TV series, whatever, but think that it was your idea to do it and that you haven't been manipulated into doing that. That was my whole entire job. Yeah. And so people don't want to have those conversations, because then they have to really face the reality of what they're going through in life. And what they're going through is a deep disconnection. And they're feeling lost. They're feeling worthless, have low self-worth. They have no value, and they're scared. They're very, very scared. So it's easier to just project onto the internet. That's not to say that there aren't some people online who are speaking really valid parts about all of those situations around the world, of course. But like you said, there are people who have earned the right to speak about those type of things. And they're typically not the people who are going to shout down someone else with a different opinion. They're the people who are going to want to engage in conversations and have nuanced stances on things, who generally and typically don't take hard and fast sides, who are able to say, and this is what people hate. You just don't sit on a fence. Saying you have no opinion is like having an opinion on you're a murderer, you're contributing to genocide because you have no opinion. Ad hominem attacks, totally, because they can't comprehend how someone could hold how can you hold two things to be true at once? How can you hold a dualistic reality? How can you look at someone else? Because this used to be something that we did all the time, where we were very proud of, oh, like, I know this person, I don't agree with all of them, but we're really good friends. This used to be normal, that we could hold opposing opinions, and now you can't do that. It's so binary. Ironically, in this really non-binary world, people are so binary, because it's terrifying, So even with the Indigenous stuff, like, I actually sat with Indigenous elders, and I had them say things to me that people don't want to hear. Like, we wouldn't normally teach someone like you, but our youth don't want to know about it. So if you want to know about it, because I was genuinely curious, I was like, tell me everything. Tell me all the secrets. Tell me all the magic. Tell me all the herbs. I want to know all that kind of stuff. Tell me your mythology. Tell me what are your dreamings? What are your stories? Tell me that. I want to know. I'm here to listen. I'm here to learn. And they were like, great. Nobody really wants to do that, but people want to use them. Come and give us a welcome to country. Come and, give us this piece of artwork that will then slap on all these jerseys and then sell them on this kind of day. It's the same bullshit. And it's why people, when we had the yes or no vote in Australia, I would say some people voted no for the right reasons. Some people voted no because they hate people, But to people, like, if you vote no, you hate someone, they're so binary. They cannot hold opposing opinions. And then they have to decide that if that person does not align with me and my opinion on this, that must mean that that person is my enemy. That's a huge jump. That's a huge jump, and a massive just disconnection from self, disconnection from community, and disconnection from reality, because we all have both of that inside of us. We all have the ability to be hateful and to be loving inside of us. It's what we choose to do, how we choose to show up. So yeah, the big projection is damaging.
The discard culture is really strong these days, and we're seeing like things like dating apps, they play into that. Like, I can just get rid of someone. So the value of a human being is defined by what that person will give me, or not even what they can give me, what I can get from them. And if they don't give me everything that I can get from them, then you're out. I'm going to replace you. I wrote about this yesterday, about how the strongest drug on the planet is romantic love. And so playing into that, which is all feeling based, which is a form of intoxication, if you look at that, the discard culture of, like, I had a disagreement with a mate 6-9 months ago, and I called him ungrateful. I gave him some recommendations in crypto, and he made a lot of money out of it. And me and another mate played a joke, and I said, like, because you didn't say thank you or whatever. And he goes, oh, you're still on about that shit, are you? And I was like, mate, that's not the right thing to say. I said, you've made 6 figures off a recommendation when I told you to get in, and you never said thank you to me. I actually had to say, oh, no, it'd be nice to get a thank you over here. I had another mate that he made $1 million off one of my recommendations. He offered me 150 grand. I said no, because I'm like, that's your money. Don't worry about it. And my other mate, like, we sort of went back and forth, and he started to escalate. And he said, oh, you're just trying to have control over me or power over me. I said, I'm not even going to address that, because it's not about that, because what you're doing is deflecting. You're using a tactic called DARVO, which is defend, attack, reverse, victim, offender. And I said, I'm not going to buy into that. You're fucking ungrateful, because I gave you a recommendation, and now you've come in hot, going on the attack at me because I'm having a little bit of a joke. And I said, I'm not going to give recommendations anymore from that perspective. It's like, I'm just going to do. I spend a lot of time and energy finding things to invest in, and you've just gone, sweet, I'll take that. No, thank you, because you're fucking entitled. And I called him out on it. Anyway, the day after, he said, what I realized in that is, he thanked me, and he goes, I want to repair this. I said, why? You don't need to repair anything. There's no rupture. I said, that's just where it's at. He goes, what you made me realize is my parents used to say to me, you never have to say thank you, blah, 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 whatever. But there's a point that they couldn't take a compliment. So they didn't want to be honored for what they were doing, which I kind of agree with. And I said, yeah, well, I grew up in a family where no one said thank you. It's just, I'm going to take from you and that's it. And I said, but I stand by my point with it, because I'm very grateful, and I thank people for when they help me. And just even like friends that I work with, I'll pay them full rate, because I want that for them. I don't take, I'm more of a giver. And he goes, he resolved the whole piece around it. And my point is with that is, I held very firm. I didn't go into emotionalism or anything like that. I said, no, this is where it's at, and this is my opinion on it, and I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to buy into some escalating issue that you've got. And when he said, I want to repair, I said, there's nothing to repair, because there's no rupture. I said, you're my friend, you're my bro. Sometimes brothers fight. That's it. But I'm not going to discard you or get rid of you because of that. That's madness. I came from a relationship previously, who it was, where anytime there was a disagreement, she'd break up with me couldn't handle it. Just break up, break up, break up. And it would be out of nowhere. And then if I wasn't arguing, we rarely argued, but it was, and I'm talking like, if I was talking at her the way I'm talking to you, she would think that that's rage. So her inability to take criticism was met with an inability to actually assess a situation for reality and say, you're in a rageful state when I'm talking logically like this. I can be a little bit direct and my tone can be assertive, but I'm not in a position of rage right now. I'm not raging off my head. But she would say that that's anger and rage that you're in right now. I'm like, no, it isn't. She's like, yes, it is. I'm like, no, it actually isn't. And now you're telling me what my experience is, and you're not right about that. That's inaccurate. And the byproduct of that would be an inability to take criticism, which is a high level, obvious pinpoint to someone that is not very narcissistic. The minute you challenge them on them doing something, pushes on a narcissistic injury, they go into narcissistic rage. The paradox of it is then they say that I'm raging when they're actually in the rage state. So it becomes this idea that people, when they get pushed on this need to be accountable for who they are, what they've done, and what they're co-creating in their life from an accountability perspective, people don't want to be responsible for that. So it's like, well, I'm responsible for all the things that I'm not involved in, from Bundjalung County to fucking Israel to whatever gender dysphoria, whatever it is. But then that means I can be an asshole to people because I'm taking on a bigger cause. And I find that it's very common amongst people like that. The ones that take on the big issues that say, I'm better than you, are quite cruel to people as well. It's like they preach tolerance, but they don't tolerate you if you don't tolerate them, which is the antithesis of tolerance.
Yeah, totally. I had a similar situation with a friend just the other night, actually. We were having a conversation and I made a joke about one of her other friends, purely just as a joke. And she said, oh, because you made that joke, I think that I've maybe been saying something that's made you think this way. And I'm going to defend their character the same way if someone was attacking you, I would defend your character. And we just talked it out. And we got to the point where it was like, I don't understand what you're saying. Can you please repeat that? It wasn't heated. It wasn't emotional. We were just genuinely dedicated to trying to understand what had happened in this situation where we had both felt there was where we'd missed each other. So, and we stayed on the phone, we talked it out. We got to the point where I was like, oh, hey, I'm really sorry for making a joke about your friend. I wasn't meaning it in any kind of way. And they were like, oh, good. I was just checking that I wasn't giving the impression that this person is like that. And I want to defend my friend. I'm like, yeah, so you should. And so we came to an understanding of what had happened. But the same thing happened with another friend, and it might not be the same scenario, because when someone has a really dysregulated nervous system, it's all like flighty and flicky and panicky and throw things away. So much so it's just like, get it away from me. It's the anxious avoidant, come close to me, go away from me. Can't handle that. Parents didn't take responsibility for me, raised me to be independent. So I also can't take responsibility for things. Also, I'm too like fidgety to even settle into myself and know who I am. So take responsibility for myself and my own feelings. Oh no, that's too much. All of that comes to the surface when you have conflict. And to go back to your point before about women wanting to be married but not wanting to be a wife, I had a similar conversation with a friend where we were talking about the kind of man that she was dating and how amazing he was. And I kind of brought up the discussion of, well, how are you behaving? Are you behaving in your best woman? And she went, oh my God, I never thought that in order to receive a man of that caliber like this, that I would have to change my behavior. I was like, yeah, you don't just get that and continue to push things away and continue to be completely independent and self-sufficient and you don't need anybody. Then why is he going to come towards you? What is he, have you provided any space in your life for him to provide for you? This is yeah. You're looking for a husband. This is not like some fun. So what kind of room are you making right there? Because he's not going to continue to organize the dates and pay for the dates and show up and want to provide if you're totally fine and you don't need him. And it was this kind of like eye-opening conversation, like, oh, I'm actually responsible for my behavior, because it's so easy. And we see this all the time online with women criticizing men's behavior. Men, he didn't do that. Men are not men anymore. Men need to do this. Men need to provide. Men need to protect. And yes, but in the same vein, women need to learn how to be women again and need to make space for that. Because if men will are pretty simple. They'll do what is required of them. But if you don't require them to do that, then they won't do it. Some of them will out of obligation, but they'll do it usually to the wrong women and who will take advantage of them. And then it's a self-perpetuating cycle. But in a healthy way, it's magnetism, it's polarity, it's the yin and yang. It's like working in symbiosis together. It's a system when you are one thing, you are another thing, but together you actually work the best as a team, and you can tackle life together with your individual skills coming together as a unit. It's not being the same person fighting for dominance, or fighting for just taking care of yourself and just kind of going along your journey side by side together that way. And so when it comes to conflict within the marriage, people are already here. They're not here together facing each other. They're side by side. So it's very easy when you have conflict to just leave, to just separate. If you're side by side and you're not facing each other, it's very easy to just, oh, well, you know, they said something and like, I don't agree with it, so I think we should get divorced or whatever. You know, the discard culture in marriage, it just devalues marriage. Like, why are you getting married? What is marriage to you? Is it just time or the next step in your relationship? What are the values of marriage? Because we used to have an agreement, and then marriage just became something that you did. And then people say marriage is just a piece of paper. Again, yes, but it is a piece of paper, and it should actually mean something. And if you're not on the same page as your partner when you enter that, then you're going to have some serious conflicts. And if you don't have the ability to know yourself, to stand in confidence in yourself, and have the ability to communicate in a healthy manner, then when conflict does come up, you are going to crumble, and your relationship will crumble along with that. It's that discard behavior happening again and again because you discard self.
Yeah. Okay. So with all of that, like the marriage thing and all that, we're seeing sort of like this snap back to Christian culture at the moment, which is
no boundaries, hard boundaries.
Correct. Yeah. Which is kind of like two sides of the same coin. One's flat, one's horizontal, one's vertical, one's we're all one, one's no, we're separate from the Father, one's you're born a sinner, one's moral relativism, whatever. It's kind of just like opposing forces. But it's, when we talk about the virtue signaling, the warring and all that sort of stuff, I'm like, my thing is to help people resolve the war within themselves. Because all of everything outside is just an extension of what's happening with each individual person. And so I think it's really important for people to say, like, there's a we, and then there's an individual me in each relationship. And you'll never get more benefit out of any relationship than the one with yourself. And the one with yourself is going to be the one that you attract in to work on something, because nature will always try to heal the most wounded part of itself. And the most wounded part of nature is the human being. And so it's going to seek to move into energetic cohesion, which is the man and the woman that come together as one, like you said, which I've got certain attributes and a woman has certain attributes. If I'm all busy in this mild psychosis going, I've got to somehow become an inner goddess before I can bring in my goddess, or I'm too much in my feminine or my masculine, no, I might just be fucking pissed off for 5 minutes. It doesn't mean, or if you're running a business that now all of a sudden you're masculine, it's like we can adopt typical male masculine traits as a woman or typical female traits as a man. That's called being effeminate, and that's called being a boss babe for the most part. And that's where, when we look at these people, one of my mates' partners is like that. She's a boss babe. She's a fucking pain in the ass. Like, she is a difficult, disagreeable, just wants to argue. There's nothing pleasurable about that. Men don't want that. We've got enough to take on in the world. And it doesn't mean that women don't get an opinion. Like, most women will go straight to it. Like, we got caught up in the comments with when you did the safe man post,
Yeah.
And the couple of feminists in there, one of the most common things I see is, I don't think you understand. They say that to people straight up. I don't think you understand what you're talking about. And I'm like, no, I understand very well. I choose my words very carefully and I know what I'm doing. And what you're saying might work on other people. It's not going to work on me. You're not going to gaslight, psychologically manipulate me into buying into your coercive nature because she said to you that you have internalized misogyny. And I'm like, internalized misogyny is a made-up term made up by women like you to make sure women like you, Lauren, hate themselves if they don't get into line with you. That's high-level manipulation that she was under the guise of compassionate and virtue signaling and all of that. And so these people have an inability to have conflict, right? And they take on these big causes, these ideas, and then when it comes down to just having a normal conversation, they can't have it without being like completely charged or emotionally reactive. Yeah, then they want someone that has a regulated nervous system when their nervous system is shot to pieces. It's like they're just hyper reactive, hyper vigilant, hyper explosive, hypercritical, and just want to demean and put people down. And I was talking with a woman for a few months and she threw shade at me. She called me a conceited arsehole because I expressed my worth in the form of time, giving her time. She's like my mind. And she's a conceited arsehole. Anyone actually values himself doesn't need to say that. And I'm like, well, that's fair if you want to say that, but you don't get to dictate to me how I express my value in the world. And she said a few other things in there, which I won't go too far into. But she said, I stepped away for a few days, and I'm saying this as gently as I can, because I didn't want to be a bitch. I said, and she was a bitch. I said, if this is you being gentle and not being a bitch, I'm not sticking around to find out who the bitch is that's going to be harsh, because if I tolerate this from you, this is going to get worse. And I said, on that reason, I'm out. I think you're a great woman. You got a lot to offer. But for me, I've got a zero tolerance policy with disrespect. And so for that reason, I'm out. And then she came back saying, no, please don't go. No, I didn't mean it. I was just joking. And I said, no, you said at the start of your last voice message that you tried to step away to find a joke about it, but you couldn't. And even in the voice message where I spoke to her, I said, look, I've been doing this for a long time. I know what people are not saying. Their words are usually a front. There's words that they don't say. You'll come back and say, no, I was joking. I didn't mean it, blah, blah, blah. I said, I've been doing this for long enough to know what you mean behind it. And I'm not going to tolerate this. Absolutely not. And she stepped back on all of it. So she actually went away, thought about it, still came in with insult. If you've got an insult, it's things like saying like, who talks like that? And blah, 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 like just criticizing. And I'm like, this is a low form of communication. If you have to move to criticism, ad hominem attacks, emasculation, being degrading, whatever it is, I'm not here for that. All right. Like I'm not going to partake in that. If you want to partake in that, that's all cool, but I'm not going to be there with that. And I don't engage in conflict like that. But because we've got such a feeling-based society now where all my feelings matter all the time, we get offended more easily. When we're offended more easily, we have an inability to have capacity to be with difficult things. And by virtue of that, I'm going to give up the minute things get difficult. And I'm not okay with that in the world of men. I trigger a lot of men, trigger a lot of women, but I sit there and I say, no, as a man, you should be psychologically unshakable. Your woman wants to bring you a problem to see if you've got what you're made of, to be able to say, it's cool, I've got you. It's all good. I don't fold under pressure. So just before I jumped on this with you, there's a woman that I'm seeing at the moment. And she was like, I was like, oh, I've got a podcast in like 20 minutes or something, so I'm going to jump off soon. And she goes, you've got a podcast? I'm like, yeah. She goes, and you're speaking to me. Don't you want to prepare for it? I said, actually, I want to make sure I get something to eat before I jump on the podcast. And I was going to have a smoothie instead of what I cooked. And then I was more concerned about if I had a smoothie, I'd probably have to have a break and go to the bathroom once or twice because I've had a lot of water today. That was my only concern. And she's like, how? Like, we've spoken about like certain things that are going on and where you want to take your business. And then you've written a wedding speech today and now you got to cook food to do a podcast and all this. And she goes, don't you feel the pressure on any of it? I'm like, no, not for a second. And so because her nervous system is more geared for emotion, she's overwhelmed because she's got to do like 4 different things. And I've got all this other stuff going on. I'm like, hey, whatever, like zero pressure. So my capacity is really big to be with difficult things because I've worked through a lot of difficult things. If someone wants to offend me, just doesn't land on me anymore. It's like, yeah, okay, cool. Like, I'm a conceited asshole, no sweat. I just won't have you in my life. It's not that difficult. And that's so when we have a look at that, there's like these relationships where we have value versus cost versus worth. So cost is more like I'm sacrificing a part of myself to get validation. Value is like what we see in the red pill and feminist movement. Like they're two sides of the same coin, which is like money, muscles, game, and frame, sexuality, fertility, and age, right? Or more for men, it's more what you have in that space. For women, it's more like what you don't have, which is like a high body count, kids, tattoos, all that sort of stuff. And so that's like value. So that's very superficial. But then there's worth, which is an internal space. Value is defined externally by what can I get through my accolades and achievements and the way I present, which is also associated with cost through sacrifice. But then there's worth. Worth is like, what are my morals, character, principles, standards, boundaries, consequences? And how do I live from that, from an internal space of expression, where if I live by my morals are social, then there's values which are independent, there's needs which are personal, boundaries form the perimeter to protect those, and consequences are what happens when someone oversteps that mark. For me, if someone crosses my boundary of disrespect, I only have two values really, respect and loyalty. If you disrespect me or are you disloyal, you're not an asset in my life that I'm going to benefit from. And I bring a lot to the table and I help a lot of people and I have a lot to offer. If you're going to disrespect me or be disloyal, that's okay. That's your decision, but I won't be around to put up with it because I've been in those situations for a long time. So when we're looking at like the nature of having capacity to be able to deal with things, once we have a strong internal sense of worth and we know it and we express it, the only people that are going to try and tear that down are people that don't have their own sense of inner worth that pushes on a button on. So they're going to try to pull people down. This is where conflict starts to happen, where if I'm just, so the woman that I'm seeing, she's gone through a few things recently and I just never take it personally. She never attacks me or anything like that, but she might get overwhelmed and I'm just like, yeah, do your thing. It's okay. It makes sense that you're overwhelmed. You got a lot going on. And if you need anything, let me know. I got some sessions on, but if you want to have a chat, that's completely fine. I forget about it after that because I don't take it personally. It's not my task to take that on. So in Adlerian psychology, there's a concept called separation of tasks. I live my life by this. What you're going through, Lauren, I will help you with it, but it's not my task to take on. I'll be there for you to validate, to be understanding, to be kind, to be respectful and treat you with dignity. But after we finish that conversation, it's not up to me to fix, change, or take that responsibility on, which is kind of like the virtue signaling person that's the so-called empath. And it's like, usually you're not an empath because an empath wouldn't call themselves an empath. You have a dysregulated nervous system that's highly attuned to threat, which you've mistaken as being an empath because you're so sensitive and feel so deeply and all that. It's like your nervous system's fucked. That's the way I see it. And so when we look at separation of tasks with the woman that I'm seeing, I'm like, no, look, that's your stuff to take on. It's not up to me to fix, change, or solve you. I'll support you and I'll love you through it, but I'm not going to take it on as though it's mine to fix. And this is a really important point in conflict. Your differing point of view is not mine to take on. It's merely just for me to understand you because there's some insight that I can get. And when I try to understand you, you'll try to understand me. And then we understand each other. Case in point, the phone conversation you had the other night, where it's not emotionalism. It's just, let's logically sort of address this in a way where we understand each other. Then we can use some emotional aspects. Look, I love you. I care about you, my friend. Let's sort it out. And then we get to a point that was quite simple to wrap up, which is like, I thought you were saying this. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, well, I was saying that. All right, cool. Let's forget about it and move on. And that's how you deal with conflict, because conflict is a gateway to resolve pressure in the body, which is a wound that wants to come out. The ego will see it as enemies when the opposite of enemy is you're my friend. And that's the way that we need to deal with it.
And the more conflict you have and resolve healthily, it reinforces and rewires the neural pathways to start to see conflict as a building block of love and safety. So I know I can have that argument with my friend where we completely miss each other. I've potentially insulted someone that she deeply cares about, but we didn't stop loving each other and we didn't get rid of each other because of it. we were like, okay, this is this thing, let's sort it out. Because, and I'm not afraid to go there. I'm not afraid to offend you. I'm not afraid to potentially unintentionally insult you, because I know that no matter what happens, we love each other, and there's nothing that's going to break that for us. We're deeply committed to our friendship for a very long time. And so there's this thing that like, oh, you know, we shouldn't be fighting. We shouldn't have this conflict. And it's not necessarily that you shouldn't have conflict. I think you should have conflict, but it should be a healthy conflict. The way that you resolve it and the way that you communicate through it is the indicator. How you come out of that, how you deal with it, is the indicator of whether that relationship is worth continuing or not. Not if you have conflict or not. People who never have conflict is such a huge red flag for me. You should have some kind of what's going on there, because that's either building up or that's people pleasing. There's some kind of disingenuity there that is really not healthy, in my opinion. I was that person that you described before, where the pain in the ass, you know, I was combative. I was really combative. I loved a good argument with men in particular. So it's quite funny when someone comes and calls me a misogynist. Because it's like
you have internalized
misogyny, you know, because I used to battle men all the time. I loved it. I got off on it, not like in a sexual way, but it amped me up. I was like, yeah, I want to like intellectually battle you. I will come onto your stage where you are and I will take you down, because it felt good. It felt like I feel like I have worth and value based upon what you see as worth and value, you know, logic and reason and success and all that kind of stuff. But it didn't make me happy with who I was. It was like you were saying before, when you have no internal grounding of who you are, you're kind of projecting out to other people to find out, am I worthy? Am I valuable? Tell me that I was good at something. And, oh, I took down someone who everyone else respects on an intellectual debate. Congratulations. Like, you must be really worth something. And I had to go away and kind of unpack all of that, because it was not healthy. And it did not lead to any good results for me. I was a hardcore feminist, you know, and it did not bring value to my life. And this is the thing I talk about often, is like, we can have these ideas and these theories, but if it doesn't translate into a reality, if your idea and your theory is not translating into a reality where you are seeing tangible results, it is bullshit. Plain and simple. The reality is, when I was able to kind of let go of that and just kind of start to explore who I was and like get more in touch with the healthy side of my feminine rather than the toxic side of my feminine, because there is toxic femininity. Then I was able to have really great relationships, really great friendships. I was able to relax. I was able to regulate my nervous system a lot more. I was able to be more intuitive, more creative. All these things opened up for me, completely changed my life. And this is why we're sitting here having this conversation right now. I'm similar to you. I don't speak on things that I haven't been through, that I haven't experienced in some way. This was my journey from like hardcore feminism to sitting back into true femininity. But again, I don't fit into any of the boxes that the online femininity world kind of talks about. I'm not a biblical feminist, biblical feminine teacher, like a lot of them are. They talk about biblical femininity. I'm not a hardcore feminist. I'm not a trad wife. Not all of those things. I like to think that femininity is an individual journey. And this is where I totally agree with what you're saying with not taking on other people's stuff as your own stuff. I love helping people, and I know you do too. It's one of your core values. I know that, and I have similar values. I really love helping people. I feel like it's why I was put here on this earth, to help people. And I don't think that there is a healthy delineation these days between helping people and then taking on their problems as your own problem. And I put out a post, oh God, months ago now, but one of my kind of sayings that I have for my relationships is motivated for his own self-growth, supports my self-growth, and dedicated to our growth. So I want you to be motivated to do your thing, to work on yourself. You've got you. Okay. I don't want to have any part of me dealing with your growth. You got you, but also support me and I will support you. because I love you and I want the best for you and I want the best version of you. Why the hell wouldn't I support you? That includes me having really hard and difficult conversations saying, hey, I can see this is going on for you. Maybe you didn't show up here or whatever that might be. It doesn't necessarily mean criticizing or bringing down or telling someone how to do something, right? But it includes having difficult conversations where you might have missed each other. And then being dedicated to your growth as a couple, because those two things are individual, and then your growth as a couple is completely separate. And if you are not dedicated to continue working on getting that relationship healthy, keeping the connection and the intimacy in your relationship, because it will die out quickly. You become friends, you become roommates, you live up in here, you don't live in your bodies, you don't actually build anything together, you don't have a similar value system. You know, you bring a couple of kids into that, you bring work schedules, and that'll just drop off like that.
Yeah.
I've seen it happen time and time again. And this is where I was saying, like, you know, the theory is turning into bullshit in reality. I went from living on the northern beaches in Sydney where I didn't know anyone who was married, or I knew one person who was married, maybe two, and in a group of maybe 100 of friends. And I moved down to where I am now, which is rural New South Wales. And everybody that I knew here was married. So I am now immersed in a community of married people, and I see what works and what doesn't work. And I have been here for 6 years now, almost like studying the population. You know, like people go to Indigenous countries to study their population. I feel like that's what I've been doing now. I've immersed myself in this culture and I've seen what works and what doesn't work. And I can tell you exactly why. I can tell you where their polarity's off. I can tell you where they're not prioritizing each other in their relationship. I can tell you where they don't prioritize themselves, where they don't understand themselves. I can see how they communicate, or where they have completely differing value systems that is a shaky bedrock, a shaky foundation for their entire relationship. And COVID tested a lot of that for a lot of people. But this is the kind of stuff that, you know, people don't want to talk about when they're vetting someone or dating someone to get into a relationship, where it's just like, oh, we'll just have fun and see where it goes. And then you're 4 years into seeing where things go. You're living together because, I don't know, maybe I should live together. Maybe because I don't want to break up. Like living together because you don't want to break up is phenomenal. There was some research around that was the main reason that men lived with women before marriage, was not because they thought that that was the next logical step towards marriage, like women did. Women thought that that was the next logical step, but men were like, I just don't want to break up, so I guess we'll live together. You know, It's fascinating, people walking blind through life, not knowing their intentions behind things because they don't know self.
Yeah, and that's like so true. And so in all of that, you know, if a man can't lead himself, he can't lead a relationship or a family. And, you know, it's an interesting one because I've been looking at sort of typical feminine and masculine biology recently. And what I've seen in society is that we've got a lot of couples where the woman is the mother and then the man is like the son. And what I can't ignore is that really, in order for the relationship I find to thrive, is the man has to become like the father she never had. Not be a father, like in the father, the daddy kind of thing, but a father structure. A father structure, which is fair, reasoned, doesn't mind rocking the boat from time to time, will use the hand of discipline if need be. That's metaphorical, not literal, by the way. And be reasoned. And so he leads himself. And then because the natural feminine will want to follow, she'll want to follow. She'll go, dude, you make the fucking choices. And so that's a really important thing to understand in that, is that most men these days is like, well, I don't know. They're scared of women. They're scared to say no. They're just kind of like, there is kind of a bit of Homer Simpson culture out there, you know, which is like, and that's also, I saw this post the other day. Someone shared it about Taylor Swift getting ripped on for being 34 and a billionaire and childless or whatever. And all the women in the comments are just going off, right? This was written by a man, blah, 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 blah. She's like, oh, men never cop it, rah, rah. I'm like, are you serious? Like, men cop it everywhere. And these women, because it's Taylor Swift, I'm like, well, think about Taylor Swift getting married, having a kid. It's not really going to be in line with all the music that she sells, which is I can't find love and I loved you and you left me and but, you know, you broke my heart and all that sort of shit. You know, if someone's going to offer you $1 billion, you will fucking say what you need to say and do what you need to do when you're under that spell. But the natural polarity of things needs to be like, the man is built for protection. Like the feminine biology is built for, besides procreation, survival. You know, so all these men that are like, get into your feelings. And men's groups are saying this. There's one group, I'm not going to say who it is, that asked me to be a lead facilitator. And I was like, I'm not doing it because it wasn't in line. It's all the sort of crybaby stuff and getting naked in front of one another to overcome your dick shame. And I'm like, yeah, all right, but I don't need to do that. And so how can you have men leading each other like this when they're so focused on feeling all the time, doing this stuff, which I wouldn't tell men to get naked in front of one another to overcome some sort of sexual shame, like,
and yell at each other. I see that a lot in men's groups, that they got to scream at each other and get all the rage out. I see that a lot.
I saw them acting like babies in another one, acting like child.
Oh yeah, where they were holding them and rocking them. I saw that too.
No, that was Jermaine Jones one. I posted it saying this is the fucking antithesis to masculinity. That grown man, you're a grown man cradling another grown like a baby. No, I'm not okay with that. But this is another one where I see them standing there going, man, like acting like a child. And I'm like, is this acting class or is this like training men? Like, what the fuck is that? And so I've worked with a couple of like top people in somatic industry, breathworking industry in the world. And I'm like, you can't feel your way to fixing the mind. You can't do it. It doesn't work that way. Feelings are the end of the chain. They happen right before behavior, which is external. Feelings are like this just before that. Feelings dictate behavior. And so when you look at this, it's like you're feeling everything and all of that, then they go away and do stuff, and then their mind's still going, or they have to do 1 hour of breath work a day just to regulate themselves, but they never get anywhere. It's a constant process of, releasing catharsis, like we discussed. Dopamine shoots through the roof. They think they've overcome something and then they can't. I've dealt with top coaches in that world that they still can't think straight, but then you fix the mind, the body will follow. And so I'm much more of the, and if I thought that stuff was the best thing, I'd be doing it. But I've seen myself go through it where I've come from an extremely abusive environment and I've sorted out my entire psychology. My body doesn't have those responses anymore. It wasn't through going into the body, it was going through the mind to be able to get there. And so these constructs that we're trained in society to think are the way through just do the opposite. I think now it's like 70-80% of therapists are female. Talking your stuff out is typically more of a feminine trait because they, like, you look at the weapon of the feminine, it's manipulation, right? And how do women like weaponize each other? They gossip and they backstab and they bitch each other and they move each other out through that and then pretend they're best friends to their face. Not necessarily universally, but in more of the toxic space of it. Men need to move and get stuff out, not feel into it and talk about their feelings all the time. And so I think there's a real imbalance that's happened between this, which when they go into relationship, they're waiting for the woman to tell them what to do. Like, tell me what to do, mum. And it's like, oh, I don't know. What do you want to do? Like, it's just like, firstly, learn to say no.
I see that so much in the relationships that I think that have collapsed or are quite rocky is like the men just going, I don't know, whatever you reckon. And her just going, come on, it's this, you're right. Totally, totally scared. But this is where the feminine, I think the feminists get it wrong, where they're like, men are scared of strong women. I'm like, men are scared of themselves. Men are scared of being men. That's actually what's happening right now. They're not scared of you. They're scared of who they would be if they had to step in to themselves to overcome you. Because men are capable of really wonderful things and really horrible things. They are designed that way. Yeah. And I will push back a little bit on the women, the talk therapy, and why women are more in the talk therapy. Women are communicative. And I don't think it's because of the manipulation. I think it goes back to even more tribal times. So I think that women were sitting around in the village talking with each other, figuring out the relational. Women are more relational in that way. We have to talk to everyone because we relied on everyone else. You cannot do this alone as a woman. You cannot raise children by yourself. It is impossible. Something will get dropped. So you had to be very, very good at relationships, at communication. You had to talk with everyone, know what's going on, know who's over there, know what's going on. Whereas men are out hunting. They're silently in a line together doing something. Because you can't have men sitting there having a chat while your bloody food's running away. You're going to scare them off. You have to be quiet, but you have to be in alignment together. So working together as a team, but side by side. Whereas women are more relational, front talking. And they talk about this when they talk to mothers about how to speak to their sons, and especially teenage sons. They say, put him in the car, have a conversation in the car where you are not looking at your son in the face. Because he will not have a conversation with you about what's happening at school or what his friends are going through or whatever. If you're going, hi, love, you want to talk to mom about what's going on right now? Look me in the eye, darling. Tell me what's happening. You know, that's not going to work. That is the way that we work, where we sit down and we want this communication and we can do things for each other without letting go of our own integrity. And I think that's what people miss. They think, well, if I do that for you, then I'm not really showing up as myself. You know, I really need this. And if you don't want to do that, well, then I'm, you know, not really getting validated in what I need. And how do we meet each other's needs? And this is the nature of relationship. This is the nature of compromise. This is the nature of marriage. You do things for each other. It may not necessarily be your default, it may not necessarily be what you want to do or what you find easy, but it is what you do for each other in order to understand each other, to come together and to resolve. This is humans, and we've lost the art of humaning.
Definitely. So what I didn't finish before, so thanks for bringing that up relative to the talking aspect. It's that men are supposed now to talk about their feelings all the time, which is not typically a masculine trait. So where I was going with that is 75 or 80% of teachers are female, 70 to 80% of therapists are female. Men largely have a female influence. So they're trying to get them to do something that isn't natural to our own biology. We're meant to move, fight, grapple. The weapon of the masculine is violence. It's aggression and violence. It can be used to protect, or it can use to maim and hurt. And when men are driven to focus on their feelings, they're going to become very dangerous. That's where I think men are quite dangerous, is when we're too focused on feelings, because then we become needy. We're crying out to mothers going, oh, just give me the bottle, give me the bottle, give me what I need. Like, and that's where we get men that are hyper codependent, that don't know how to be independent and don't know how to go out and kill and hunt, and kill metaphorically, not literally. Like, it's even crazy I have to say, like, I know, metaphorically, right? That's twice I've done this in this podcast. It's like that I even have to delineate that is how far we've gone from what actual normality is. But from the biological perspective on this, it's like, I'm built to protect. A woman is built, her biology is built for survival. She must survive. Men protect. That's it. My job is to sacrifice myself for the protection of women and children. That's it. So the point where women say, you know, and my ex did this to me one time. We're in a bit of a scrap, and she was like, I'm a strong, powerful woman. And I started laughing at her. Like, I was like, yeah, is that supposed to intimidate me? You're like 52 kilos. I've done jiu-jitsu for 10 years. I've spent time in prison. I've had street fights. Do you think that you scare me? What I said, what even is that? Like, what do you think I'm going to do? Like, run away from you and be scared? And I see things like this, and it's like this, it's a delusion. It's a delusion. And I saw this Dominic Quitrona or something like that. He's in the masculinity space. I haven't seen his stuff for a while. And I saw him agree on one of his posts with a woman saying, we need strong women leading men. And he agreed with it. And I'm like, you're a fucking masculinity coach. You shouldn't agree with that. You're an agreeable masculinity coach, which is the antithesis to being masculine. We're meant to be disagreeable and assertive, not to the point of being tyrannical and difficult. But I jumped on that, could never find the post again. I think he deleted the comment. And I said, you should not agree with this woman. I said, this is not what we need. Strong women leading men. That's a feminist approach. And the feminists are like, the people think when we talk about feminism, it's, oh, you don't want equal rights and equal pay. And that's not, like, if you're still having that argument, you haven't looked at the whole movement properly. But they complain about this tyrannical patriarchy we live within. And if people want to know more about that, just watch Jordan Peterson's breakdown of that. It's so much easier than me going into it. Because it's true, we don't live in a tyrannical patriarchy. We don't. It's like we look at that and then we look at how that's affected women. And the women that are fighting against it are looking to control and dominate men in the very same way that they have said that they've been controlled and dominated by men. So they've become the very thing that they fight against and that they hate. And then they become insulting, belittling, devaluing, all of the things, which is not a transcendence of the very issue in the first place. Well, all it is just propagating it to the other side of the coin. It's the same thing as the red pill movement's now the answer to feminism. So first it was patriarchal dominance, which most of the people that cry patriarchal dominance are talking about shit that was happening hundreds of years ago. And then it's like, okay, so feminism was the answer, and now red pill and MGTOW are the answer to that. And then the other antithesis to that is to go hardcore trad Christian. So I'm like you. I'm sort of like, I'm just my own being. It's like, I don't buy into anything. I believe in traditional masculinity, not necessarily from a Jesus is my savior aspect. Like I see a lot of accounts like that. And I explored Christianity last year only because I've explored a lot of esoteric texts. And then last year went into it as well. And I said, I'll give it a year. And by 9 months, I was like, no, this isn't for me. Like I looked at it and I go, yes, there's scripture and then there's religion. They're two different things. And identifying as a particular belief system is only usually a reaction to another belief system that I'm no longer in agreement with. And when I looked at it, I said, this religion is just a master slave construct. I need a savior. I have to have a savior. And I've heard quite a few accounts. And it's a common thing in the Christianity space. They say, just put it at the foot of the cross or whatever they say. Give it to Jesus. I'm like, you can do that, but life will come for you. There is something that happens. There's like a psychological rule that if you don't deal with your shit, life will force you to deal with it. I've seen this too many times. It's a 100% success rate of it happening. You are meant to become a whole person, not necessarily just a good person. And if you're just leaving it at the foot of the cross, that's called bypassing, because you're not actually dealing with the necessary internal mechanisms to come back into integration, to become a whole person, which is essentially the individuation process where we split from the false self and then move into our own unique divine expression where we come out into the world. Some people might do that through Christianity. It's not to say they can't. Some people might do it through Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, whatever it is. If I were going to sort of look at any belief system and be aligned with it, I'd be more a Buddhist than anything else, because it's a bit more, not necessarily horizontal, but it's just like, it's a more fair ecosystem in the way that I see life, where a lot of the tenets, they've got it right. Like attachment is the root of all suffering. It's 100%. Attachment to identity only makes you suffer. So when there's this constant ping pong back and forth, right? Like it's a reinstitution of old systems from a long time ago. I think his name is David Whitehead. He talks about esoteric Christianity. Joel and the boys interviewed him on Here for the Truth. I really like his approach because he systematically breaks it down to all religions are light and dark in opposition. And that's what each part, that's like the tenet of what goes on. You look at all the religions, they're pretty much all the same meaning, but just different words. They're all very similar in their tenets. And like you posted the picture of the guy that could walk on water from the Aztec culture or whatever it was. These stories are repeatable. These stories have existed in other places. So who's right? What's accurate? It really just depends on how hard you want to grip onto a part of yourself that needs to be saved by something. That's the way I see it anyway. And it's absolutely no disrespect to people that are in that space. I've got friends that are in that space, and I have the utmost respect and love for them. It's not up to me to tell them their experience, the same way it's not up to them to tell me that I'm wrong in the way that I assess things. I assess things from a set of four. One, I have to prove it. Then I have to repeat it. Then I have to verify it. Then I have to explain. If I can't run something through those four systems, I don't touch it. So just because someone's written a book of other books and brought it together, I didn't see things with my own eyes. I can't prove it. And so it's as well, I'll stop that part there, because it's like we're looking for someone to save us, and now everyone's going to that in order to save them. So much there's even infighting in between those guys too. You know, there's multiple people that are off each other that aren't talking, and like one denomination's better than the other, and then you know, if you're doing this, it's demonic. It's like, fuck me, I can't even eat a donut nowadays being accused of it being demonic. It's like, it's exhausting. And see, it's tiring and it's exhausting.
And to bring that, I totally agree. And to bring it all back around to where we started. And I think that is disconnection from God, because that is not your relationship with God. That is not your relationship with the something that is here that created all of this. Whatever that belief may be, that is humanness. That is humanness fighting among humanness and trying to grapple with the unknown, because the unknown feels unsafe. So we must label it. And my personal belief is, if you can label it, you're probably wrong, because it's so vast and so unknowable but your only thing is your relationship to it. And what does that mean? And what does that feel like? What is that experience in your life? How is that showing up for you? And for anybody else to have any say on that, I think is incorrect. And I recently had this discussion with a friend of mine who is deeply Christian and who told me, you are incorrect. And I was like, okay, cool. So I said, but it's not. He said to me, you cannot separate God and Jesus. You cannot separate what happened on the cross. Your debt has not been paid. And I said, but it has been separated. I can have a wonderful relationship with God and yet have no relationship with Jesus. You can't separate the two. Well, I have, but you can't. But that's not my experience. That is not my reality. You just cannot deny my truth in this and my experience, because it is my own personal faith journey. And it's amazing. Well, I think there's a certain level of agreement that you need to go into any kind of religion. And I'm similar to you. I've explored lots of religions over my life, deeply. And the thing that I can never get around to is I cannot agree to everything in that religion. Like you had said before, there are overlapping principles that are similar. I can get on board with a lot of those principles, but I cannot agree to everything in your religion. And in order for me to say that I am a part of that religion, I would have to agree to something that is not congruent in my own body, in my system. It doesn't feel right. And I won't do that to myself. So therefore I can believe 99.9% of the same things that you believe. Yet I do not call myself what you call yourself, because I refuse to give over that part of me. And so I think there is this level of like, look, not for everybody, but there is a level of like, I've denied a part of myself in order to belong to this community. And so when someone else is not doing that, it's a real challenge to those people, because they will say, well, that's why I just give up.
You know what that's called?
Everything.
Yeah. What? You know what that's called, don't you? It's called a cult.
Yeah.
That's a cult. It's when you need to belong to a cult, you have to deny a part of your authentic self in order to belong.
Yeah.
That's where the word culture comes from. Cult. And so if you're in that space, like I posted a Krishnamurti quote, and he was like, oh, back in the occult, are we? I'm like, I don't even know who you are, but no, I'm not. And he said something along the lines of like, why is it that all you occultists just believe that instead of accepting Jesus? I said, not being an occultist, I can't answer that question. But what he's talking about in the post is related to the mind and the psyche, which is accurate. He goes, why don't you believe that the occult is only about deception? I said, well, there's deception in Christianity and in occultism. And he goes, where is it in Christianity? I said, that's the wrong question. The question is, where isn't it in Christianity? He didn't write back after that, because it was a point that he didn't want to look at. But there's abhorrent crimes in organized religions, like absolutely the worst kind happen in the name of God, in the name of Jesus, in the name of religion. And I think it's more, how are you living your own life? How are you directing your own life? If you have look, I had a near-death experience and Jesus appeared to me. So I have a very strong excuse if I want to go into that. But I read the Bible. It didn't resonate with who I was. There was something missing internally for me. Something didn't land right for me. It just didn't. And I listened to that. It's not a feeling, like I'm not emotional about it. It is a whole body knowing that that's not for me. And I looked at it, I explored it, I read Evidence That Demands a Verdict, which is a book around like proving Christ, all of this stuff. And I'm like, I still can't get there. And if I can't fully get there, when I look at the nature of the psyche, the individuation process, going from authentic to true self and integration, that fully makes sense to me. And why it does is because I've gone through a process which I've seen my own self heal from addictions, from violence, from, like womanizing, all these things. None of that has an effect on me anymore because I've healed those parts, individuated, and become integrated. That's a real process that I've gone through to get to that point. And none of the old stuff affects me anymore. And I'm not sacrificing myself to live like that. Whereas some other people might go into Christianity, give all that up, and then say it healed me from this and that. And maybe it did, but they've had to sacrifice something to get there. That's the difference between the two that I see.
Well, that's the core principle of Christianity. It is a sacrificial death cult. Like Jesus died, he sacrificed himself, and they shit on pagans for sacrificing animals and children or whatever they used to do in these primitive cultures. But their entire religion is based upon a sacrificial death cult. And occultist just means hidden. So I don't mind being an occultist. I like to find things that are hidden. I find that interesting. But yeah, the sacrifice is an integral part of that, and it's not something that everybody can get on board with. But your experience with Jesus, that's valid. That's valid. I have not had that. And who are you? If Jesus hasn't chosen me and hasn't chosen to show up in my life, who the fuck are you to say that he's done the wrong thing? Maybe I'm not chosen. But we will know them by their fruit is so valid. I know so many Christians who are not good people. And I also know so many non-Christians who are really good people. I also know Christians who are great people. And I know non-Christians who are terrible people. And I think that's how you should judge people. Excuse me 2 seconds. I'm just going to plug my computer in.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think, look, to wrap it up, I know we've been chatting for such a long time. Wow, we've covered a lot.
Glad you said give 9 minutes to me because we'll keep going. I thought, no, 60 will be fine. And then I'm like, no, 90 is good. 90 is good.
The thing is, when you and I get started, we just set each other off. And it's we go on the same.
This is why we can't have a plan. This is why we can't have a plan before we come into it, because then this stuff's going to get missed. We won't be able to just let it ride.
We've had some good chats. Look, for those of you who are listening and want to look back at some curated topics that Jag and I've talked about, they sit on my Instagram page and the highlight lives that I've done. And we've talked on specific topics for an hour and been really great on that. But when we were chatting about doing this podcast today, and I'm sure we'll do many more as this podcast kicks off and takes a hold, we're like, what's the topic? I'm like, let's just chat, because when you get cornered into speaking on a topic, you and I are both very knowledgeable, and we can give people a lot of value for that topic that they're looking for. But that's kind of not what this is about. This is not necessarily about giving people value for a certain topic. This is more about us as an individual coming together to have nuanced conversations. And in that, refining ourselves, refining our communication skills, refining community. And through you guys listening, I guess also refining your listening skills, because we've been chatting for like 2 hours now.
Yeah, I think what you said there is so important. And I was going to get into this around narcissistic abuse before, but it's about this sort of like this ability to look at things from a whole perspective rather than black and white. Nothing's either wholly good or wholly bad. There's a nuanced perspective. And I think the more you could say healed you become, the more nuanced you can start to see life, in the point of like, it's neither black nor white. There's a middle ground. And that's where, rather than operating in the vagaries of gray, you actually realize that gray is the landscape that you get to explore. So you're going, okay, that's this person's experience, but I don't need to discard them or get rid of them because they believe in Jesus or whatever. I like, same as you. Like, so a couple of my close mates are Christian, and fucking I'd do anything for them, you know, and I want the best for them. And if that's their life that they chose to live, I will support you 100%. And it's the same with everything and one that I've spoken here. This is just my personal opinion, the way that I live life. It's not, there's no hate towards anyone. There's no ill will towards anyone. But I'm going to call shit out where I see it. That's who I am. And if I don't agree with something, I'll fucking say I don't agree with it. But it doesn't mean that I will hate the person or make it personal or anything like that. It's just about being able to discuss these topics. And maybe this is what it is. We look at social topics as opposed to being like, this is the mind, this is polarity, this is the feminine, this is the masculine. And we sort of bring it into a more modern, relaxed context where people can go, oh, that's an interesting point of view, as opposed to being like, this has to be educational and blow your mind or whatever else, which a lot of the other stuff we've done before has had that effect on people. But it's important to demonstrate nuance through people that are willing and open to have intelligent dialogue with one another, to accept each other's points of view, to push back like you did where need be, to provide clarification, and to show people that that can be done by intelligent people, as opposed to flying off the handle and screaming narcissist because I don't agree with you.
Yeah, totally.
And I think that's really important.
Yeah, totally. And I value the thing, you know, look, there are a lot of people online who run in the similar circles that we run in, but you know, we've been online friends for many years now. We've never actually met, just so everyone knows all the lives that we've done and how much we share each other's stuff. We've never actually met, but I deeply value Jag's friendship. And simply for that reason, that we can have a greater expansion of conversation, rather than be held to our public profiles or our business profiles, which I don't see a lot of online. I see a lot of people pretending to be a certain type of thing in order to sell something. But I don't see that in you. I see genuine authenticity. Sometimes I think, well, you are oversharing. I would not have shared that. You know, that's just how you roll. I'm like, wow, okay, you're just letting everyone know. All right, cool. You know, but there are differences in us, and I value our differences as well. We don't always agree on the same things, but we do agree on having the discussion about it and just giving each other space and time to talk about that. And I think I agree with you. Just in having this kind of conversation is value in itself, if not just for an experience and an example of what can be.
Yeah.
Without an agenda.
And I appreciate that. And that's why we get on so well. You know, I'm heading down to Sydney next week, and last time we were sending 20-minute voicemails to one another on my drive down, which I really enjoy because it goes back and forth, and it's like a podcast. Each voice message is like a podcast. And I really value that about you, because I know your level-headedness and your ability to communicate is such a high level that I think, and this is what we were talking about. You said you're here to help people. I'm like, when are you going to do something? Like, get out there, fucking do it, help people. Because if you could help women communicate at the level that you did, you would be a major, major, major benefit and save so many relationships. Many. So I have so much respect and love for you as well, man. And it's like, you're a true friend, and I really value you.
Thanks. That's very sweet. All right. I think we've been chatting so long. Let's just, let's wrap it up here. But you want to come back and we'll chat again?
For sure.
All right, cool. Well, we'll do
that.
No
question about it.
Thank you so much for your time, because I know that you value your time. So I thank you for giving it to me and to everyone else who is going to be listening. And if people want to find you, where can they find you?
Instagram, Pure Jaguar. I'm going on TikTok now, actually, pure.jaguar, so I can do more long form content. Yeah, because apparently it's better for long form, and Instagram's pretty polished, and I'm fucking tired of being throttled on there because of speaking about something that's accurate. So I'm going to be moving over to that. I think my account is pure.jaguar. On Instagram, it's Pure Jaguar. So those two places.
And if they want to work with you, if you got some stuff coming up, are you doing one-on-one still or not?
Not really. I'm moving away from it. I'm going to do a group container for coaches and people that might want to do coaching, and for the coaches that I've trained, where we're going to come together, and it's going to be all around teaching, case studies, how to resolve things, the human condition. I want to get more coaches out there that can do what I do rather than doing one-on-one. I'll still take on the odd one-on-one. I might do some group therapy for a cheaper amount to work with more people in a group format where I can be a bit more express, and there'll just be more teaching coming up. But the one-on-one stuff, by the end of this year, I'll be out of that. I won't be doing much more.
Yeah, I used to do one-on-one stuff, and it's not for me. I much prefer group containers. Look, maybe you and I need to do, if you want me to help women learn how to communicate, maybe you and I need to do a relationship container, and we can
do it.
It's done.
Yeah, I'm doing one at the moment. I just started, but the next one that I do, we'll get stuck into it.
Sweet. All right. Thanks very much. Sweet. And I'll talk to you soon.
All right, love. Thank you.